Part 5. Another recently acquired faculty is the sense of fragrance. It is not mentioned in the Vedic hymns and only once in the Zendavesta. Geiger tells us that the custom of offering incense with the sacrifice is not yet met with in the Rig Veda, though it is found in the more recent Yajur Veda. Among the biblical books, the sense of fragrance of flowers first makes its appearance in the Song of Songs. According to the description in Genesis, there were in paradise all kinds of trees that were pleasant to the sight and good for food, no mention being made of pleasant odors. The apocryphal book of Enoch of the 1st century BC or even later, extant in Ethiopian, likewise describes paradise, but does not omit to extol the delightful fragrance of the tree of knowledge, as well as other trees in the Garden of Eden. Besides this evidence, it is said to be capable of proof from language that no such sense as that of fragrance existed in the early times of the Indo-Europeans. And it is also worth mentioning in this connection that no animal, although many of these so greatly surpass us in recognition by scent, possesses, so far as we know or can discover yet, any sense of fragrance, and that children do not acquire it until they are several years old, not indeed for several years after they have acquired more or less perfectly the sense of color, thus corresponding in their mental development, as pointed above, with the evolution of the general human mind, for the color sense probably came into existence in the race many thousands of years before the sense of fragrance. Part 6. Instincts, which are both human and animal, as the sexual and maternal, undoubtedly came down to man through long lines of descent and have been in possession of himself and his ancestors for millions of years. But the human moral nature, though it is rooted in and has grown from these, is of comparatively recent origin. It not only does not go back behind the birth of self-consciousness, but it is certainly very much more recent than this. Man, that is self-consciousness, as has been said, must have come into being some 300,000 years ago, when the first allelist Homo uttered the first true word. In the individual today, man is born when the child becomes self-conscious, at the average age of, say, 3 years. Among the Indo-European races, not more than about one individual, so-called idiot, and 1,000 grows to maturity without attaining to self-consciousness. Self-consciousness having appeared in an individual is only lost in great and rare crises, as in the delirium of fever and in forms of insanity, notable mania, and on the other hand, the human moral nature does not appear in the individual on the average until, say, halfway between 3 years old and maturity. Instead of 1 or 2 in 1,000, several times the same number in 100 are born, grow up, and die without a moral nature. Instead of being lost in great and rare crises, it is constantly being temporarily lost. All these indications go to prove that the human moral nature is a much more recent birth of time than is the human intellect, and that if we suppose the latter to be 300,000 years old, we cannot suppose the former to be anything like that age. Part 7. Primeval man, from whom we are all descended, has still upon the earth in these later days 2 representatives. First, the savage, second, the child. It would be true to say that the child is a savage and the savage a child, and through the mental state represented by these two, not only each individual member of the race, but the race itself as a whole has passed. For as in his instantine evolution, the individual man retraces and summarizes in a few brief months the evolution of the human race, physically considered, from the initial unicellular form in which the individual life began through all intervening phases between that and the human form, resuming in each day the slow evolution of millions of years, so likewise does the individual man in his mental development from birth to maturity retrace and summarize the evolution of the cyclical life of the race. And as the individual physical man begins at the very bottom of the scale as a unicellular monad, so does the psychical man begin on the bottom round of the ladder of mind, and in his ascent of a few dozen months passes through the successive phases, each of which occupied in its accomplishment by the race thousands of years. The characteristics of the mind of the savage and of the child will give us, when found, the characteristics of the primeval human mind from which has descended the average modern mind that we know, as well as the exceptional minds of the great men of history of the present day. The chief differences between the primeval and the infantile and the savage mind on the one hand and the civilized mind on the other is that the first, called for the sake of brevity the lower mind, is wanting in personal force, courage, or faith, and also in sympathy or affection, and that is more easily excited to terror or anger than is the second or civilized mind. There are, of course, other differences than these two between the lower mind and the higher, differences in intellect and even in sense perceptions, but these, though great in themselves, have not the supreme significance of the basic, fundamental moral differences just mentioned. The lower mind then lacks faith, lacks courage, lacks personal force, lacks sympathy, lacks affection. That is, to sum up, it lacks peace, content, happiness. It is prone to the fear of things known, and still more to vague terror of things unknown. It is prone to anger, rage, hatred. That is, to again sum up, to unrest, discontent, unhappiness. On the other hand, the higher mind, as compared with the lower, possesses faith, courage, personal force, sympathy, affection, that is, possesses relatively happiness, is less prone to fear of things known and unknown, and to anger and hatred, that is, to unhappiness. The statement thus broadly made does not seem at first sight to mean very much, but in fact it means almost everything. It contains the key to our past, our present, and our future, for it is the condition of the moral nature, thus briefly adverted to, that decides for each one of us from moment to moment and for race at large, from age to age, what sort of a place this world in which we shall live appear to be, what sort of a place it is indeed for each one of us. For it is not our eyes and ears or even our intellects that report the world to us, but it is our moral nature that settles at last the significance of what exists about us. The members of the human race began by fearing much and disliking much, by loving or admiring little and by trusting still less. It is safe to say that those earliest men of the river drift and the cavemen, their successors, saw little beauty in the outer world in which they lived, though perhaps their eyes in other most respects were fully as keen as ours. It is certain that their family affections, as in the case of the lowest savages of today, were, to say the least, rudimentary, and that all men outside their immediate family were either feared or disliked, or both. When the race emerged from the cloud-covered past into the light of what may be called inferential history, the view men took of the government of the universe, of the character of the beings, and by forces by which this government was carried on, of the position in which man stood by the governing powers, of his prospects in this life and after it, were, as in the case of the lower races of today, gloomy in an extreme degree. Since that time, neither the world nor the government of the world have changed, but the gradual alteration in the moral nature of man has made it, in his eyes, a different place. The bleak and forbidding mountains, the awe-inspiring sea, the gloomy forests, the dark and fearful night, all the aspects of nature which in that old time were charged with dread, have in the place of it become clothed with a new and strange beauty. The whole human race and all living things have put on, in our eyes, a charm of sacredness which in the old times they were far from possessing. The governing powers of the universe, obedient to the same beneficent influence, has been gradually converted from demons into beings and forces less and less inimical, more and more friendly to man, so that in all reports each age has interpreted the universe for itself and has more or less discredited the interpretations of the previous ages. Which is the correct interpretation? What mind of all the vast diversity of the past and present in all this long series pictures to itself most correctly the outer world? Let us consider for a moment our spiritual genealogy and then dwell on this meaning. Our immediate ancestors were Christians. The spiritual progenitor of Christianity was Judaism. Judaism having its beginning in that group of tribes collectively called the Terakite or Ibrim, those of the other side, i.e. of the Euphrates, descended from the mythical Abraham or Abraham. These tribes, being themselves a twig of the great Semitic branch of the Caucasian race stock, sprang directly from the Chaldean polytheism. Chaldean polytheism, again in its turn, was a development and direct descent of the sun and nature worship of the primitive, undivided Caucasian family. The sun and nature worship, again, no doubt had its root in and drew its life from initial fetishism or the direct worship or of individual earthly objects. In this long descent, although we applied different names to different parts of the continuous series, as if there were lines of demarcation between these different parts, there has been no break. In all the thousands of years, never such a thing as a new departure. In these spiritual matters, the maxim natura non facit saltum holds as firmly as it does in physics and geology. The whole affair is a simple matter of growth strictly analogous analogous to the unfolding of the branch from the bud, or of the plant from its seed. As has well been said, la religion étant un des produits vivants de la humanité doit vivre c'est-à-dire changer avec elle. And on the analysis, it will be found that under the vast diversity of external appearance, from fetishism to Christianity, underlying the infinite variety of formulas, creeds, and dogmas resumed under these five heads, the essential element upon which all else depends, which underlies all and is the soul of all, is the attitude of the moral nature. And all things in the intellectual form and from outer aspects of religion are as obedient to the gradual change taking place in this are the movements of the hands and wheels of the watch to the expensive force of its mainspring. The external world stands fast, but the spirit of man continually grows, and as it does, so its own vast Brocken shadow, thrown out by a moral nature but shaped by the intellect, which it projects on the midst of the infinite unknown, necessarily like a dissolving view, changes and changes, following the alterations in the substance, that is, the soul of man, which gives life and reality to the shadowy phantom which plain folk call their creed, and which metaphysicists call the philosophy of the absolute. But in thus interpreting from age to age the unknown universe in which we live, it is to be observed that we are, on the whole, constantly giving a better and better report of it. We attribute to our gods, as the ages pass, better and better characters, and we are constantly expecting at their hands better and better treatment, both in the present life and after death. That means, of course, that the quantity of trust or faith which we possess is steadily increasing and encroaching upon its opposite, fear, which is as constantly lessening. So equally it may be said of charity, sympathy, or affection that the constant increase of that faculty is steadily changing to us the aspect of the visual world. Just as the growth of faith is altering the image we form for ourselves of that greater world which is still invisible. Nor is there any indication that this double process has come to an end, or that it is likely to come to an end. Part 8. The length of time during which the race has been possessed of any given faculty may be more or less accurately estimated from various indications. In cases in which birth of the faculty took place in comparatively recent times, within, for instance, the last 25 or 30,000 years, philology, as we have seen, may assist materially in determining the approximate date of its appearance. But for comparatively old faculties such as the human intellect or simple consciousness, this means necessarily entirely fails us. We fall back, then, upon the following tests. 1. The age at which the faculty appears in the individual man at the present time. 2. The more or less universality of the faculty in the adult members of the race today. 3. The readiness or the reverse with which the faculty is lost, as in sickness. 4. The relative frequency with which the faculty makes its appearance in dreams. 1. Of each of our mental faculties, it may be predicated that it has its own normal or average age for appearing in the individual. As for instance, memory and simple consciousness appear within a few days of birth, curiosity 10 weeks after, use of tools 12 months after, shame, remorse, and a sense of the ludicrous, all of them about 15 months after birth. Now it is to be noted that in every instance of the time of appearance of a faculty in an infant corresponds with the stage at which the same faculty appears, as far as can be presently ascertained, in the ascending animal scale. Just as in the case of later appearing faculties, their age of appearing in the individual corresponds with their period of appearance in the race. For instance, memory and simple consciousness occurs in animals as primitive as the echinodermata, while the use of tools is not met with below monkeys, and shame and remorse and as a sense of the ludicrous are almost, if not entirely, confined among animals to the anthropoid, ape, and of the dog. So purely human faculties, self-consciousness, which appears in the individual at the average age of about 3 years, makes its appearance in the race certainly more than 1,000 centuries ago. While the musical sense, which does not appear in the individual before adolescence or puberty, could not have existed in the race more than a very few thousand years. 2. The longer a race has been in possession of a given faculty, the more universal will that faculty be in the race. This proposition scarcely needs proof. Every new faculty must occur first of all in one individual, and as other individuals attain to the status of that one, they too will acquire it, until after perhaps many thousands of years, the whole race having attained to that status, the faculty will have become universal, as they say. 3. The longer a race has been in possession of a given faculty, the more firmly is that faculty fixed in each individual of the race who possesses it. In other words, the more recent is any given faculty, the more easily is it lost. Authority for this proposition, which indeed it scarcely needs, will be quoted where it is stated in another connection. It is almost, if not quite, a self-evident proposition. 4. A study of dreaming seems to reveal the fact that in sleep, such mind as we have differs from our waking mind, especially by being more primitive. That, in fact, it would almost be strictly true to say that in dreams we pass backwards into a pre-human mental life, and that the intellect faculties which we possess in dreams, especially, recepts as distinguished from our waking concepts, while in the moral realm they are equally those faculties, such as remorse, shame, surprise, along with the older and more basic sense functions which belong to us before we reach the human plane, and that the more modern mental faculties such as color sense, musical sense, self-consciousness, the human moral nature, have no existence in this condition, or any of them do occur, it is only as a rare exception. Let us now compare one with the other a few of the faculties which have already been mentioned in the light of the rules laid down. To do this will give us more clearly than perhaps anything else could a definite notion of the growth of mind by the successive addition of new functions. For this purpose, let us take, as a few examples and to stand for all, simple consciousness, shame, self-consciousness, color, sense, the human moral nature, the musical sense, cosmic consciousness. Simple consciousness makes its appearance in the human infant within a few days after birth. It is absolutely universal in the human race. It dates far back before the earliest mammals. It is lost only in deep sleep and coma. It is present in all dreams. Shame, remorse, and a sense of the ludicrous are all said to be born in the human infant at about the age of 15 months. They are all pre-human faculties and are all found in the dog and in apes, and they undoubtedly existed in our pre-human ancestors. They are all almost universal in the race, being absent only in very low idiots. They are all three common in dreams. Self-consciousness makes its appearance in the child at the average age of 3 years. It is not present in any species but the human. It is, in fact, that faculty, the possession of which by an individual constitutes him a man. It is not universal in our race, being absent in all true idiots. That is, it is permanently absent in about 1 in each 1,000 human beings in Europe and America. There must, however, be members of the low races, such as the Bushmen of South Africa and native Australians, who never attained to this faculty. In our ancestry, self-consciousness dates back to the first true man. Thousands of years must have elapsed between its first appearance and its universality, just as thousands of years are now passing between the first cases of cosmic consciousness and its universality. A race, we are told, unclothed, walking erect, gregarious, without a true language, to a limited extent tool-using, destitute of marriage, government, or any institution. Animal, but in virtue of its relatively high moral nature making it gregarious, and its highly developed receptual intelligence, king of animals, developed self-consciousness, and by that fact became man. It is impossible to say how long ago it was when this event occurred, but it could not have been less than several hundreds of thousands of years. This faculty is lost much more easily than its simple consciousness. We lose it in coma and also often in the delirium of fever. In certain forms of insanity, as in mania, it is often lost for weeks and months at a time. Lastly, it is never present in dreams. The color sense has already been considered. It remains to say a few words from the present point of view. It comes into existence gradually in the individual. At 3 or 4 years, there may be a trace of it. At 8 years of age, it was found by Jeffries, still absent in a large percentage of children. 20 to 30% of schoolboys are said to be colorblind, while only 4% of adult males, and so Dr. Favre of Lyons reported in 1874 to the French Congress for the Advancement of Science at Lille some observations that seemed to prove that congenital color blindness was curable. But it does not seem to have occurred to him that the color sense, being invariably absent in very young children and making its appearance at a variable age as the children advance toward maturity, color blindness would necessarily appear to be the teacher watching the development of the child and exercising its sense of sight upon colors to be cured. We have seen above that the color sense in the race cannot be many of tens of thousands of years old. Color sense is absent in one human being out of every 47. It is seldom present in dreams, and when it does occur, that is, when any color is seen in a dream, it is generally that the color for which good reasons was first perceived by man, named red. The following occurrence illustrates in a striking manner the usual absence of the color sense during the partial consciousness which occurs in sleep. A man whose hair is white dreamed that he was looking in a glass and saw plainly that his hair was not only much thicker than he knew it to be in fact, but instead of being white, as he also knew it to be, it was black. Now he well remembered in his dream that his hair had never been black, and it had in fact been a light brown. He wondered, it is worth mentioning here, and that wonder or surprise is a pre-human faculty and is common in dreams, in his dream that his hair should be black, remembering distinctly that it had never been so. The importance to note about the dream under consideration is that though it was clear to the dreamer's mind that his hair had never been black, yet he did not remember that it had been brown. For some reason there was a difficulty in calling upon the consciousness of color. The same man dreamed that he had wounded with a knife an enemy who had attacked him. The bleeding was profuse, but the blood was white. He knew in his dream that it should not be white, but no image of its true color or any color presented itself. The human moral nature includes many faculties, such as conscience, the abstract sense of right and wrong, sexual love as distinguished from sexual desire or instinct, parental and filial love as distinguished from the corresponding instincts. Man has both these instincts in common with the brutes as well as the higher feelings. Love of our fellow men as such, love of the beautiful, awe, reverence, sense of duty or responsibility, sympathy, compassion, faith. No human nature is complete without these and others. It is therefore a very complex function, but for the purpose of the present argument, it must be treated as if it were a simple sense. Now, at what age does this human moral nature appear in individual men? It is never present in quite young children. It is often still absent at puberty and even at adolescence. It is a late acquired faculty. It would probably not be far wrong to say that the average age for its appearance in the individual is somewhere about 15 years. It would seem clear from a study of history that our human moral nature could not be more than some 10 or 12,000 years old. For a careful consideration of the records that have come down to us from the early Romans, Hellenes, Hebrews, Egyptians, Assyrians, and Babylonians would indicate unmistakably that as we go back into this past faculty tapers down to towards a vanishing point rather, and if it continues so to taper as we ascend the ages of all what we distinctively call our human moral nature would certainly have disappeared by the time we had got back the number of centuries mentioned, 10 or 12,000 years. In what proportion of the men and women of civilized countries does the human moral nature fail to appear? There are so many men and women who have a partial moral nature, so many who, having little or none, wear, as well as maybe, the outer semblance of one. The judging of men and women in this regard is so difficult, the problem is so veiled and so complicated that it is impossible to give more than an opinion. But let any one man who is curious read a few such books as those by Despine and Ellis, then view the men and women among whom he lives by the light thus supplied, and he will be forced to the conclusion that the proportion of the adults who have little or no or an undeveloped moral nature is far greater than those who have little to no or an undeveloped color sense. We probably should not be far wrong if we said that at least 40 men and women out of every 1,000 in America and Europe are in the position indicated. Then how many races of men are there still living upon the earth, none or very few of the members of which have what would be called from the point of view of our civilization a human moral nature? Again, while self-consciousness is lost, not of course always, but frequently, in insanity and fear, the moral nature is, we must all admit, subject to much more frequent lapses and absences, and with far less cause. Self-consciousness appeared in the race, as we have seen, about 300,000 years ago. The above considerations would point to a very much later date for the appearance of the moral nature. And do not all records and historic indications, so far as they go, support this inference? Finally, the musical sense, a faculty which is now in the act of being born, does not appear in the individual before adolescence. And what follows after this, the psychogenesis of man, illustrated by a few faculties. It does not exist in more than half the members of our race. It has existed less, perhaps considerably less than 5,000 years. It is never or almost never present in dreams, even in the case of professional musicians. While self-consciousness is insanity, and insanity is lost, as said, occasionally the musical sense in that condition might be said to be invariably lost, at least after an experience of 25 years, with about 5,000 cases of lunacy. The writer cannot recall a case where the musical sense was retained, the person being insane. The accompanying summary, in tabular form, of the main facts concerning the evolution of the faculties mentioned and some others will make, it is believed, the whole subject more intelligible than any long exposition thereof. The figures in the table and text are not given as being exact, but for the sake of conveying a clear idea which it is thought will be correct enough for the present purpose. To sum up, as an ontogeny is nothing else but phylogeny in pedo, that is, as the evolution of the individual is necessarily the evolution of the race in an abridged form, simply because it cannot in the nature of things be anything else. It cannot follow any other lines, there being no other lines for it to follow. It is plain that organs and faculties, speaking broadly and generally, must appear in the individual in the same order in which they appeared in the race, and the one being known, the other may with confidence be assumed. When a new faculty appears in a race, it will be found, in the very beginning, in one individual of that race. Later, it will be found in a few individuals. After a further time, in a larger percentage of the members of the race. Still later, in half the members, and so on and so forth, until after thousands of generations, an individual who misses having the faculty is regarded as a monstrosity or an idiot. Note 2, and this is important, when the new faculty appears, especially if it be in the direct line of the ascent of the race, as in the case of simple self or cosmic consciousness, it must appear first in a member, then in multiple members of the race who have reached full maturity. For an immature individual, other things being equal, cannot overpass or go beyond a mature individual of the same race. Thus, as aeons pass, has the great trunk of the great tree of life grown taller, and from time to time shoot forth twigs which have grown to branches, and then again to noble limbs, which in their turn have put out twigs and branches, many of them a great size and number, uncountable. We know that the tree has not ceased to grow, that even now, as always, it is putting forth new buds, and that the old shoots, twigs, and branches of most of them are increasing in size and strength. Shall the growth stop today? It does not seem likely at all, no. It seems more likely that the other limbs and branches undreamed of today shall spring from the tree, and that the main trunk from which the mere life grew into sensitive life, simple consciousness, and self-consciousness shall yet pass in still higher forms of life and consciousness, such as cosmic consciousness.